Well, we're joined today by a guy that I have watched from afar, that I really enjoy his leadership and watching him lead in areas that are just so challenging, but also so life-giving. And we've got Jason Ballard on today, the podcast. How's it going, dude?
Bro, I'm just glad to be here with you, man. It's good. It's a good day. It's sunny in Vancouver. And so we were just chatting before this in our office. Those who are in the office today feel like a sunny day in Vancouver, you're instantly 10 percentage points higher in well-being. And so, versus yesterday, I'm at least 10 percentage points higher. So
that's hilarious, man. When I lived, I didn't tell you this before we got on the podcast, but I lived in Abbotsford for about almost just over a year, I think it was. And I went to Bible college there. And
where'd you go to Bible college, dude?
I went to Columbia Bible College.
Cool. Sweet.
Yeah.
What year were you there?
2015. Yeah. 2015.
Nice. What were you studying, man?
I just did the Columbia One program. It was just basically to get away from, it sounds terrible, just get away from life from where I was living. I was just living a different kind of lifestyle and I needed to just peel back, and I decided to go to school, and I chose to go out west because who doesn't love the mountains? But I could not believe how much rain goes on.
Oh, bro.
Out west.
Every day.
I could not believe it. It was like,
Yeah,
I didn't have a rain jacket. I had to buy one out there. So,
for sure, man. For sure.
But yeah, thanks so much for being here, dude. We chatted before we got on here. You willing to say yes in a time that we're living in a COVID season. We're almost a year into COVID, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about COVID, but it's just great to have leaders like yourself say yes and be able to Zoom in or Skype or Google Meet and just be able to chat about life. And I want to have a conversation today. And if you're new to the podcast and maybe someone shared this with you because you needed to hear it, we're a podcast all about sharing life stories of people that are living a life not just for themselves, but are trying to leave an impact in people's lives, a positive impact. There's lots of negatives going around in this world, but we really want to highlight people that are living a life that says, hey, like, I can grow, but I can also impact people and help them understand that they too can grow and don't have to just be so comfortable. And Jason is one of those people that leads in many areas, like I said right off the hop, but he leads with intention. And Jason, I want to ask you a question before we get really deep into it. Who are you? What you're about? Passions? All that kind of stuff, man. Because you've got so much great stuff going on in your life.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to ask maybe a more specific question. I'm like a dad. I got 3 kids. I'm a husband. I live in Vancouver. I love where I live. Mm-hmm. And I made a really pivotal decision. So I became a follower of Jesus in the beginning of high school and in middle school. Mm-hmm. And it was a real intentional, it was a life change. It was like I didn't want to follow God and then felt like I encountered him in a real way.
Wow.
And wanted to follow Jesus and really do that. And, but I wanted to do it in through business. So I studied, there's a university here in Vancouver called Simon Fraser University. There's 2 big universities. There's UBC and SFU. I studied at SFU and studied commerce and business there. And then throughout my undergrad though, I found myself actually speaking at Christian events and churches and teaching the Bible, and always terrified of getting it wrong. And so I was always studying the Bible a ton because people asked me to share it. And I'd be like, well, it's made such a difference in my life. I wanted to share with other people. And so I found myself literally paying my way through university by speaking at events on the weekends and stuff like that.
Come on.
By the time I was in my 3rd year, I was like, oh, I think I wonder if I'm going to go into ministry. And that became a real healthy question for me to wrestle with. But I had all this entrepreneurial desire, and my mind functioned in the idea of how do you start organizations and scale and build teams and solve problems for the sake of serving the world. I thought I was going to do that through business as a Christian, but then realized that I think that maybe I felt really called. And when I say that, I say it in the way that we all sort of stumble into our vocation. You kind of have that cross section of what are you passionate about? What could you imagine not doing?
Hmm.
And I just found myself really being, and then I don't know if we'll chat about this, but also looking at cities and communities and trying to be like, how can I make the biggest difference in a normal community, and really believing that the local church can impact every layer of society. Um, and so want to give myself to that cause. And so I finished my undergraduate, I switched from business, I did a minor in business, and I switched to English Lit. And, just because it felt like the closest thing to what I was going after. And then I've been pursuing ministry in different shapes and sizes,
Hmm.
always wanting to serve local churches and working with organizations that were building resources to serve pastors, leaders, and churches. And then recently, like some friends and I started a new church in Vancouver called the Way
Hmm.
Church, part of a ministry called the Canadian Church Leaders Network, and work with Alpha and a couple other organizations. And yeah, we're having a lot of fun, man. It's the most exciting season of life. Even though we're in the midst of COVID, it feels like it's not exciting because it's easy. It's exciting because I feel like we're meant to be doing the things we're doing.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's a bit. You can drill deeper on any of those things. I don't know if that covers much of what
Yeah.
you're hoping to hear.
Yeah. Something that came to my mind to ask you is when that switch or that shift happened, when you had this idea of like, man, like I want to do this with my life. I want to be a Christian, follow Jesus, but I'm going to do the business way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
When that switch happened inside your heart or your mind and you notice maybe there's another way that I'm really wired up to go, how did that impact your life? Like, because switching degrees, switching like programs, like kind of unfold that for us.
So there's this like personality profile called Berkman. You ever heard of
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
People get, it's like, it's kind of like a Myers-Briggs thing or built out. There's lots of
Yep.
different things like this. I like Berkman. It's good. And one of the things that Berkman measures is like how comfortable you are with like change. And
Hmm.
I'm like as comfortable with change as humans can be. And so I don't know if, so like that, I felt nothing. It was just like, all right, so now I'm like, and so even like we're planting this church for September 20. It's not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing. It's not like a thing I'm proud about. It's like, I just like, we move from Langley to Vancouver. I feel nothing, and so sometimes empathy is difficult with those around me when we're doing change. So, I don't know, man, it felt like, here's what's interesting, dude. Whenever you talk about retrospect, and this is the problem with books and podcasts and sermons or whatever you listen to, you hear people's stories in retrospect. And so it's like, yeah, and then this happened, I felt called. It sounds like it was a really simple, clear
Yeah.
decision, but that happened over months, if not years, and probably felt more like, what's the metaphor? Like, listen, erosion happens over time, water dripping on something and changes its shape. When you look at something that's been like impacted by water erosion, it seems so intense, like that's the shape. But that happens so slow. And I think
Hmm.
for me, in my undergraduate, those seasons, it's like, it was just like more and more my heart was moved towards it. There was a moment where I had to sort of like realize, oh, my heart's changed. I feel like the Lord's in this. But it happened through hundreds of conversations, not one
Wow.
conversation. It happened through lots of different moments. And I think that's true of most, like some people have stories like God spoke to me and it was like this
Yeah.
moment. I have like 2 of those in my whole story.
Hmm.
Everything else of following Jesus has been like, even marrying my wife, it didn't feel like, in retrospect, I said, and then I realized that I wanted to marry Rachel. But that actually
Yeah.
happened over a long period of time. And you find yourself being like, oh, I think this feels like the decision that God's in, or feels like one that's wise and good. It's not like a light switch. It's more like, I don't know,
Mhm.
building, building, building something over time, and you realize
Yeah.
now it's complete.
I love that. And you kind of mentioned something about how it was over conversations and people speaking to your life. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on with surrounding yourself with people that are wanting to see you reach potential. But I want to shift our conversation to generosity. Generosity is something in a time that we're living in right now that um, is something so influential. Can you speak to generosity right now in a time that it's and this is now an old saying, is the selfie moment, right? It's such a older saying, but it's still so alive and true right now, where people are searching for self-truth. And when it comes to generosity, like yourself, of someone that is aligning themselves up to live for others, what does generosity do to someone's life?
It's a cool question, man. I've never regretted giving something away, but I've regretted a lot of things that I bought.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
have so many things like in my closet, or like, you know, whether it's a pair of clothes, or like,
Mhm.
you know, as a teenager saving up for like a stereo or something like that, or MP3 player, and
Yeah.
being like, man, when I get this iPod, it's going to change my life. And then you get it, you're like, maybe I should sell this. I bought a pair of shoes recently because I thought it'd make me run faster. And it was like an impulse buy, and I so regretted it after. And then I was
Mhm.
trying to like, can I return these? Like, we won't return used shoes. And listen, I think everyone has like regrets for purchases, and I have no regrets for giving. And as a follower of Jesus, either we believe, and I know not everyone listening is a follower of Jesus, so I'll just speak
Mhm.
for myself and my own journey with the Lord, and for those of you, either God's a partner with our resources or he's not. There's no in between. So like, sometimes people live these like dualities, like, yeah, thank God he provided this for me, but then are stingy with the giving. But that's like, that
Oh.
doesn't make any sense. That's not sound logic. So either he has no interest in your money and it's all on you to earn it, or you have a partner in God. And I really believe, and it's not just true of money, like whenever you talk about
Mhm.
generosity, you got to talk about time, you got to talk about your talents and your treasure, right? My friend Lawrence is like time, talent, treasure. And I've always found that a helpful framework. So I'm talking about all those things. But either God's a partner in it with you or he's not. And I've just watched in my own life, like self-centered behavior, which is constantly a battle for me, is always like, it never leads to a full life.
Mhm.
You find your life by losing it. This is like, you know, and Jesus said it's better to give than receive. And my whole life is just a battle trying to believe that. And then I realized that anything important, uh, the myth right now in culture is that things that are most important need to feel spontaneous and authentic.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
like love relationships need to feel spontaneous or authentic, or they're not real love. But what I've realized is that with my children and my wife, who I love more than anything, you know what I mean? Like my kids, they just mean so much to me. Time with my kids doesn't accidentally happen, like quality
Mm.
time. It's something that you do intentionally. And so it's like, when I look at my week, if I'm disorganized with my week, then the things that are sometimes less important actually monopolize my time.
Mm.
But if I take a step back and I look at my time like something that I'm responsible as an adult to
Yeah.
steward, then I look at my time and say, hey, no one else around me is going to prioritize my kids and my wife, Rach. So I have to. So I look at my time, and so I try to take a full 24 hours off of work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And try to do things like that, and then prioritize my kids in the midst of it. No one else is going to do that. So you find yourself stepping into it. And I think the same thing
Mhm.
is with money, is like, one of the reasons why people who want to be generous aren't generous is because they're not in the driver's seat of their resources, their time, and what they're giving to. And so for me, it's just like, man, just the discipline of being like, so I do a thing like a measured giving. So like, we try to, like, me and my wife pick a percentage of our income and
Yeah.
try to give a little bit more each year than the year
Mhm.
before. And we play these little games. Like I remember right before we got married in July. In May, we were together and we saw like somebody advocating for child sponsorship. And so we're like, hey, let's sponsor a child together. That's our first sort of like thing we did together. And then we sort of said, hey, what if every year that we're married, we sponsored one more child together? And so now we're married
Wow.
for 11 years. So we have 11 kids we're sponsoring. And our hope is that at 50 years, we've got 50 kids a month for sponsoring. And listen, I don't think I make enough money right now to do that. But I'm like, it's a game
Mhm.
that me and Rach and our partner in the Lord, with our
Mhm.
resources, are playing together. And you can't really lose at that game,
Yeah.
because like, if we can't do it, that's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But how fun to imagine if we could. And so it's just been, I mean, there's so many things to think about generosity. I'd just say this though, like, when the single focus is getting more, it never leads to more joy. Like
Mm.
you'll never buy like the perfect thing, and then your wardrobe or your library or your car or whatever it is complete. There's always more. And so you're never going to meet someone. And then the fact, dude, I don't know who's listening to this, but if they're listening, they have access to some means of resource, probably. Um, we get to be we get to actually help people, man. How insane is that?
It's
Like,
crazy.
it's an amazing thing that we get to be on this side of the equation in some cases, and to be givers. And I think it's one of the greatest honors.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I got lots to say about it. I actually feel like a little bit uncomfortable talking about it, because it's like, I don't feel like I'm where I want to be with my generosity. And I wish, like, I've been running, bro. I don't know if you can tell. I mean, you just
Oh,
seen,
dude, I can see it. I can see it,
I've been
dude.
running, and I've been running for months now, and I'm a horrible runner. But when I started running, I thought, there's going to be a day where I get out and run and it doesn't feel like freaking garbage.
Death.
And and listen, I'm so annoyed. It still feels like garbage. So here's what's true. I'm a better runner than I was 4 months ago, but I'm not, it's not, I thought it would just be easy. And so that's my relationship with generosity, my
Yeah.
time, my energy, my money, whatever it is. It's like, man, it's an incredible journey. I have more faith to give than I did 10 years ago.
Wow.
We're giving more than we did 10 years ago, but it still feels like sometimes this war inside. And so that's why I can't leave it up to my emotions. It's something that we determine together. And then on top of that, every once in a while, there's an emotional response. You hear about a need, you hear about a crisis. When you have friendships around the world, which is the gift of the moment we live in, being so connected digitally, you have friendships around the world, you're going to be exposed to all kinds of need. And my biggest advice for anyone who just has a hunch that maybe generosity is a journey they want to go on is, like, don't wait till later to start giving. Like, start now, just do it. Just follow your instincts. You have nothing to lose. And I think that I like to think in the lens of business. So you think about, like, return on investment, compound interest, all these things. So some people think, oh, I'm gonna wait till I'm more rich to give. So I'm gonna give now, okay? Or I'm gonna save now, and then I'm gonna build up my wealth so I can give more later. There's some logic there, but it's not complete logic, because there's also compound interest and return on investment on your gift. And so when you come alongside a child in another country, or you invest in a church plant, or you invest in somebody's life in need, like one of the, we're really close with a recovery farm program called Wagner Hills. When one person comes out of addiction, it changes their whole life. They become an advocate. They bring life to their children. And so there is a return on investment in your giving as well. And we can't always see it. So don't wait till later. And I realized that, like, it never gets easier to give. Like, it's never easier than it is right now to give. And so I don't know, man, those are some thoughts. What do you think?
Dude, those are some, like, incredible thoughts. And I think they're incredible because they have impacted your life, and they're not just impacting your life, they're impacting the people around you. And I watching from afar, it's funny, social media world, I feel like I know you because I follow the church, like the church that you've planted, the podcast.
I'm way less interesting in person though, bro. The more you get to know me, most nights I'm just at home watching, like, The Office.
Dude,
and so it just goes downhill once you get closer. But yeah, go ahead.
That's the same thing with me, man. It's like it's all we can do right now. But I love how you focused a little bit, not a little bit, but on time. The generosity of time. And I'm just thinking of this, of how the podcast that we both know, Carey Newhoff, and he started this podcast and it stopped for a while and it got rebooted, and you were the face of it. Well, the voice of it. I guess the face as well. There's a YouTube channel for it. And your generosity and time management to allow other leaders to come in to understand what it means to tell more stories, to impact more people in a digital time where we can get positive content out that is life-giving. I think of how you lead Alpha as well. You've been part of that Alpha team for how many years now?
I think about 10 years we've been working with the team at Alpha.
Yeah, and that's 10 years of generosity, of investing in more people, surrounding other people with good people so that they can reach their potential and hear something that is life-giving, of the gospel of Jesus, the life of Jesus. And generosity, I think, is something that it's not what God wants from you, it's what he wants for you. It's this obedience factor. Not too long ago, I heard a leader say, like, you can like you, oh shoot, I don't want to lose it here, but it's this idea of trying to one up God with generosity. He'll just come back and he'd be like, yeah, guess what? You are going to sponsor 50 kids one day because I will make the means and the resources happen by your obedience of generosity. And I think that's just such an incredible thing that I think this world needs to practice more. And I've talked with a few leaders lately about it's not trying these things out. It's actually training in them.
Mm,
We can't just be
that's
trying
cool.
these. Yeah, we can't just be trying generosity and be like, well, I don't have any money. I can't do it. You know what I mean? Or it's no, we need to be training in it, practicing the way of generosity, and receiving that presence of God in those moments where other people will be impacted. And I think that your life of generosity has just been awesome to watch. And I think that a lot of people could learn from a young guy like yourself that has a family, that invests in his family first and above all, but is also his relationship with the Lord, but then also people that are surrounding him. And I just think that's incredible.
I mean, those
Um,
are kind words, man. And I wish when you said them that that was a perfect reflection of what's true. I think it's like, I think when it comes to the day to day life, it's a lot more messy than
yeah.
it looks, you know. And I know like that's obviously implicit, but I think what it is like my what I love about the message of Jesus, and I've been really is that like Jesus both sets this bar that like invites us to this life of generosity and
Mm,
love. But the Gospels and the Bible also make sense of a worldview where like we're deeply flawed and broken, and
mm-hmm.
the grace of the gospel allows us to keep going even when we don't hit the mark, but it doesn't lower the bar. Like one, so like if what do you do when there's like a bar or like a an ideal, and then there's your real life and there's a gap there? You know what I mean? So like ideal, real, and then there's a gap.
Yeah.
One option is you are inauthentic and you pretend it's better than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like become unreal to meet the ideal. And that's very common. Um, the other option is to lower the ideal. And so you see that as well. So you see some people just like, there's a masking, there's
Yeah.
lower the ideal. I think the gospel actually makes sense of that gap. You know, my friend Chris said, "Oh, you let grace fill the middle," and that's got to be true because it kind of rhymes. You know,
Oh,
but
yeah.
you know, if it rhymes, it's got to be true, right?
Yeah. True.
Um, let grace fill the middle. No, but I really like that because it's like for me, it's not, I think it's really bad to lower the ideal. I think it's really bad to mask the real. So we need to actually have a worldview that allows us to not need to do either of those things and allow us to keep growing as a human being.
Hmm.
And that's what I feel like the journey is I'm on. So when we talk about generosity, I think half of what I'm saying reflects the real, half of it reflects the ideal. And it's like, I
Wow.
really feel like I'm on that journey. Um, but man, it's like, I a relationship with Jesus, it's it really does like make its way into every part of your life,
Hmm.
and it happens slowly. But it's like I think I think I'm just really struck by. I think I kind of said this already, but as I reflect on my walk with God, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not where I was.
Hmm.
And so I thought by 33, I'm a lead pastor of a church. Surely by the time I'm a lead pastor, I never struggle with Bible reading.
Yeah.
I'm never impatient. I'm never frustrated.
Hmm.
I never let my ego get in the way. And that's just not true. But what's really cool is I do feel like God, like he's done his work, like the Holy
Hmm.
Spirit has worked in my life to make me, well, I'm not as kind as I'd like to be. I'm more kind than I was. And he's really faithful to keep sowing
Hmm.
and working in my life. And then when I do stumble and fall, I'm met with such grace, a gracious Heavenly Father. And I just really long for people to know
Hmm.
the God who just sees such potential in each person and yet meets us with such grace and kindness that allows us to keep on going. And if you don't know that Jesus, that God, then that's what I long for people listening
Hmm.
to know is this God that comes into your mess, wants to invite you out of it, but partners
Hmm.
with you in it with grace.
That's gold, man. That's gold. I want to get really real with you for a moment about some really let's phrase it like this. How could and let's talk about relationships and building into those relationships. how can the Canadian church right now um, start shifting its mentality to raising up young next generation leaders, whether that's a pastor, whether that's a foreman of a job site, whether that's a librarian, whether that's a chef? How does a church step into these moments in a time with so much noise where they start shifting and changing and building upon leaders? Um, how do you see that shifting right now in Canadian culture with churches?
I don't know, man. What do you think? That's a big question. I don't know. I don't know how to help foremans or cooks.
No, but
But
how does the church start shaping and helping molding that their faith can be alive, right? I guess maybe that should be the question of how does the church start beginning and moving forward with raising up resilient disciples of Jesus to live out the everyday life.
here's a thought. I don't know. I really don't know the answer. But I think sometimes we think a lot about things at scale. So how does the church raise up the next generation?
Mm-hmm.
So when I can't solve a problem, I try to think about the lowest common like piece, and I don't worry about scale. So the question is, how does one person invest in one other person, right? Like, because we have to sort of like at its core, what does it look like to make one disciple, one person who lives out their faith holistically? And what do you think, man? Like, what does it look like for you, David, to invest in one person? Like, what's that looking like in your life right now, outside of
Well,
your biological family?
yeah, I see the neighbors of the apartment that I live in of um, investing in them actually how things are going on in their life, of understanding what their job life right now is or their family life is, and investing them in that way, and not always trying to get from people, but also just give to people. And
Hmm.
that's, I find time is, and we go back to this generosity of time. But I think right now what's going on within, I think people are taken back when they have someone in their life. Like I've got a guy that I love and care for right now. He's a good friend of mine. Met him when we moved to Exeter, Ontario, when we planted a church that we're a part of, and he just doesn't understand why I love him,
Hmm.
why I care for him. He doesn't understand it, and it's just because I see him as a person
Hmm.
that Jesus loves. Right? He doesn't know God. He doesn't know Jesus. And we've had him over for Christmas, his family over for Christmas. We were allowed to, at Christmas time, have a few people in our homes to watch our online services. And they're checking out church every once in a while. He takes photos for us because he's a photographer and videographer. And um, he just does not get the love that I have for him because of
Hmm.
his baggage. He asked that question, why? Because of his baggage of his life, where he's had
Hmm.
moments and stuff like that. But it's just like this beautiful piece. I think there needs to be more people catching people off guard with just investing their time and their care
That's
for one
cool.
another.
So I think about that. I just think that's probably it then. It's like, is there room in your life for someone else? It's awesome when the relationship's really mutually beneficial, but like,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's making room. So like I heard about one family who they had teenagers and they used to always set the dinner table with one extra spot. And so that at least the kids always knew they could have a friend over for dinner, and they just made enough room
Mm-hmm.
at the table. I think I saw my parents do that really well. And we grew up, my grandma and grandpa lived in a basement suite in the house. And like, I'd have buddies over after school and they would like walk straight into grandma and grandpa's suite and just hang out with grandpa. And he just poured himself into them. And I think what's really important is grandpa, there's never a program. He was never trying to, there's no like I'm in the business of like making programs and like being like, how do we
Yeah.
raise the next generation of pastors? But I just think it's like, at like the honest thing is like, you just need people like my grandpa Wood, Dave Wood, he's passed away now. At his memorial, one of the people speaking said, how many people are, if Dave Wood was your grandpa, stand up. And so me and my cousin stood up, and he goes, if you called Dave Wood grandpa, stand up. Another 30 other kids stood up. And man, that's powerful. And he just like, he really encouraged people. He really enjoyed people, and his life had some qualities worth reproducing and emulating. And I just think that's it, man. is we have to make room in our lives for a few other people, and invest in them and see the best in them and enjoy them, and not try to turn it into a program, but just to see people as people who need cheerleaders, they need coaches, they need advocates, and all of us can do that. And then all of us need it as well. Like, we need people investing in us. And I think when you do that, and then people begin to do that, and then those people begin to do it, that's a disciple making movement. That's when it goes viral, like a virus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's how it spreads. And so I think that's really it, is like, what does it look like? So I meet sometimes young adults who are saying, hey, I need a mentor. And then I'll meet like 50-year-old great people in the church. They go, I want a mentor. And then usually the boomers come up with the idea of like, could you set up some sort of like mentorship program, like where you pair us up? And I'm like, oh, like this is pre-COVID. I'm like, or you could just, it's like there's a group standing there. If you just walked over and introduce yourself, that would be a good starting point. And I know that feels intimidating, but I'm like, well, someone has to be awkward, so the whole thing doesn't have to be awkward. And a program, like, you know, and then if those things begin to happen organically, you can add program and structure and learning outcomes and all those things to it. And I'm all for that. But I think it's about getting like room for one or two more seats at your dinner table and opening up your lives metaphorically and literally. And I can't wait to be out of the pandemic where we can literally make room at our tables. And I think I think that's what it looks like, man, to raise up the next generation of leaders. And we have to take it seriously. And so it's interesting being 33 and me being like, we need 50, 60, 70, 80-year-olds investing in the next generation. Yeah. But then also, like, it looks like even at my age, making room in my life for people and that are younger and aren't necessarily the buds I want to hang out with, but being like, oh, I want to do what people did for me. And I felt like people made room in their life. Like, the only reason why I ever started preaching, which is such a big part of my life, is because my youth pastor, Ben Woodman, he wasn't being invited to preach at things all the time. And then he would bring me along, and I was always so honored to go. And then halfway through his sermon, he would go, hey, Jason, come on up. And he'd go, Jason, you can preach for 5 minutes. And I preach for 5 minutes, and then he would let me sit down. And then he would fix anything I said and tie it into his sermon. And that's actually how I learned to preach, was Ben would be invited to speak, and he would give away his platform to me. And that gave me the opportunity. And I think that you don't have to be like a traveling speaker to do it. We all have a resource. We all have a platform. We have all opportunities. Give it away. Wow. And I think that has to happen at scale. But we can't just turn that into a program. It has to be individuals that get a heart and get a grip for that.
Yeah, that phrase of give away our platform or get off your platform and invite someone to invest in someone, to stand there and also love and care for them and watch them and train and also encourage and allow them to dream. I think that's a great answer to the one that I had right off the hop there. And I just think that's just so great. And I think what would our world look like if more people got off their platform?
I think the question about platform is, and this is, again, I can only speak from a Christian worldview. I know everyone listening has a Christian worldview, but from a Christian worldview, I don't believe that any of the resources are limited. So, like, you know, any platform I have, it's not mine. I didn't build it. I'm stewarding it. And so stewardship doesn't mean you're careless, but it means like, oh, I can give this away. And I think my encouragement for people is like, the myth is, if you give things away, there'll be less for you. But my experience has been, I think what the Christian worldview teaches is that when you give it away, it actually, everyone gets more. And one example could be like in the business world right now is, it used to be that you didn't want to give away published content. This is in the publishing world, like print. You didn't want to give away content. You need to save it for your book. If you give away the content, no one will buy your book. But that might have been true in the 80s, maybe even true in the 90s. It's definitely not true anymore. It's the opposite. Yeah. You give away, you give away, and then those people want to buy your book because
Yeah.
they want to invest in you. They're invested in what you're doing, and they want. So the truth is, when you give away, it actually expands. It blesses the person you're giving to, and it also blesses you. And I think that's a kingdom principle. And I think there's some actually practical arguments to be made about it. But I think it's like, man, I think we give away, and we can't be always trying to manage our own PR and brokering everything. We have to have this kind of open-handed approach. And I think there's a counter argument. Like if somebody wanted to go, hey, you know, like you can want to push back on, I think of course there's like stewardship and wisdom. You don't want to just like, if you don't want to be careless about it. But I think that the general posture needs to be, I don't hold tightly to things, especially platform, especially connections. One of the interesting things that people love to like be really protective of is connections.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I might be open hand with this or this, but I don't want to like, but I'm like, even that's kind of like, it's the opposite. Like, man, be open-handed, make connections, help connect people and give it away. And your life will become more rich. You know what I mean? And not try to like, so that's always something, again, someone trying to live into, don't always do it as well if they like to, but I really believe everyone wins when we have that posture.
That's so great. That's awesome. And that kind of can transition to like my next thought about this whole idea of investing in others is having the right people around you. You talked about at the very beginning where you had people speaking in your life, and it was over years where you saw this shift and change that needed to happen in your life, where maybe it's not going to be the business route. It's going to be more of the ministry route of the church planting and alpha and all that kind of stuff and vocational teaching. And I want to ask you, with surrounding yourself with the right group of people, what does that do for your emotional health?
I think for me, everyone's wired really differently. I'm not an extrovert, I'm an introvert. I don't need to always be around people. So it's not an extrovert thing that I'm about to say. I just know that if I'm around people who are healthy and love me and know me, but aren't afraid to challenge me, like good friends, not cheap friends, friends that I know have my best interests, but are also like deep enough friends that I never feel insecure in the relationship. That's the most important rhythm in my life, is being connected to good friends. And if I can get that in place, it seems like all the other things fall into place. So for me, like cultivating and investing in important friendships. So I'll just give one, for example, so I had a roommate named Chris Hall. Before I got married, I had like 8 roommates. We lived in this house in Langley, which is close to Abbotsford, and we just had the best time. They're really deep friendships. And Chris is follower of Jesus. He's a school teacher. He's the most generous person I know. I've never seen someone give away more money and time as he did. And he taught me a lot. He really inspired me, and being able to live with him, I got to see his life. He never flaunted it. You'd have to like, catch him in the act to realize how much he was doing. And he loves Jesus, and he really encourages me. He's been like someone who encourages me even in purity and trying to honor God with every part of my life, and in generosity and friendships, all those things. So I learned so much from Chris. And then what happens is, Chris, he's a full-time job. I got a full-time job. I get married. He gets married. We no longer live together. And then we both have kids, and life gets complex. And the truth is, it went from we saw each other every single day to then we're seeing each other like once a week. Then we're chatting on the phone once a week, till now it's like, and I live in a different city now. We literally have to plan and go out of our way to connect. And so there's this myth that friendship looks like bumping into each other, always having the same interests, always doing those things. And I love the kind of friends that you play sport together, or you're into the same, whatever it is, activity, or you work together. And those are a certain type of friendship, and that's great. But when it comes to your deepest friendships, you can't let chance define who your deepest friends are going to be. You need to decide what kind of people you're going to invest in. And so Chris Hall, like, he's got no choice in the matter. I'm going to make sure he stays one of my best friends. Another guy's Landry McAllister. The guy's such a freaking beauty. My buddy Jared Dawson's such a freaking beauty. These guys are just amazing, like whole integral people. And I'm not running into them randomly. It's like making that decision. So I've got a few people on my phone who are on that like short list. And if I'm driving and I can just go like, hey Siri, call, you know, or if I'm going for a walk, or if I haven't in a long time. And they do the same for me. Is like, we go out of our way to make that time to connect. And it's just been so important for me. And you asked about emotional health, and I just know for me, having people I can be honest with where I'm at, how I'm feeling, what I'm going through, people that can remind me who I am and what I'm called to, people that can call the best out of me. Man, I need those in my life. There's an unhealthy type of dependency called codependency. That's not what this is. Codependency is like, man, I don't know who I am without them. You need to know who you are on your own in Christ. But there's interdependency, which is where you're unashamed to say, I need people in my life. And I'm not afraid to be vulnerable. I'm not afraid to be broken around a few people and flawed. And I think what's really special about the friendships I just mentioned, they really know the real me. So like I mentioned Jared. So the cool thing about Jared and I met in high school, wasn't a Christian high school. Jared became a Christian. We were doing like discussion groups in our school, kind of like Alpha. Became a Christian in that context.
Was that Quest? Was that Quest?
Yeah. We're doing a thing called Quest. And Jared's just like a good friend. We went to SFU together. He was in business. We studied, we commuted together. And then he got into accounting. So he moved downtown years before I did and worked at a firm here. And his relationship with Christianity and the church has been like his own, like definitely not as like, you know, for him, it wasn't always like a big priority. It was just my buddy, you know? And so lots of good conversations, he's my guy. And what's been amazing now is like probably once a week or once every 2 weeks, we go for a long walk together. We're both living in Vancouver, and he's such an important part of my life. And I just love that he's not like so many people you and I are around. We're both pastors, are in this world. And I really cherish my relationships with people in ministry. I mentioned Landry, he's a pastor, but Jared, what's so refreshing is like, Jared knows the real me more than anyone. And I can absolutely be myself with him. And he encourages me in ministry, encouraged me, he knows who I'm called to be. Doesn't give a rip about what I do. He doesn't care what podcast I'm on, doesn't care how many people are listening to my talks, just doesn't care. And he was the first person to give financially to our church plant. So I'm at his house one night. I'm like, dude, we're doing it. We're going to plant a church in Vancouver. And he's like, oh, okay, let me get my checkbook. So he's like,
checkbook.
Yeah. I'm like, why do you have checks, dude? Aren't you 30? He's like, yeah, let me get my checkbook. And he comes and he writes the first check that someone wrote to the Way Church. And that was just such a powerful experience. And like, you know, at the time for him, it had nothing to do with like, man, I really think Vancouver needs another church. For him, it's like, I'm just behind Ballard. I'm with him. And I would do the same for him, whatever his dream is. And man, I'm rambling, but I could talk about these guys all day. They just taught me a lot about friendship and good friends. You don't have to dress yourself up around. Good friends, you don't ever worry about where you stand with them. Good friends you can receive because, you know, you're not worried about keeping score. Good friends, they point you to what matters most, to generosity, to kindness, to your walk with Jesus. And man, if you have people in your life that do that, pull the best out of you, and you know, just cherish those and cultivate those relationships and name them. And as life gets more complicated or full, and maybe you move around and move cities, cultivate those relationships. Don't lose those closest friends. I think that's important. And then one other relationship worth mentioning is there's a guy in my life named Daryl Johnson. He's 72. He's a pastor in Vancouver for a lot of years. And I just think you got to find people who are like way further down the walk, the race than you are. And what I admire most about Daryl is he is 72. He's got a very healthy relationship with his wife. He's got a great relationship with his kids. He still smiles. He still likes the church. He still likes the city he lives in. He doesn't bicker or complain. He's full of joy. He loves Jesus. He is interested in people. And I see him and I go, that's what I want to be like at 72. And so that's another one of those relationships where it's a super high priority to be around him. And just to try to be like, hey, so often we like, think about like, when you're dating or you're asking for advice, who do you get your advice from? Like you go to your other buddies who also are crappy at dating. Like that's the dumbest thing in the world. You know what I mean? Or it's like, so it's like, we have to look at people who are like, actually have a life that looks like the life you want, and then get around them. And you can ask them questions. They might have answers, but mostly you just got to get around them enough to catch a little bit about what makes them tick and how they built a healthy lifestyle. And I think that's a really important thing. So you gotta have those like peers that you're walking with, going deep with, but then also some of those people where it's like, man, they're further down the race than you are, and you see something in their life that looks whole. I even think about like people, if you're like, man, I want to get sound financial advice. Sometimes people go, oh, this person is worth so much money. He's worth millions of dollars. So I want to get financial advice from him. And I get that. But does that person also have a healthy relationship with money? Meaning, is money drive his life, or is he free of the love of money? So best case scenario is somebody who has built wealth, but also isn't driven by wealth and is radically generous. And he's got a healthy relationship with his spouse and his kids because he didn't earn that wealth at the cost of something more important. So when you're trying to like take advice from somebody and look at their life and say, do I want to follow that life? There's no one perfect, so you're never gonna find anyone perfect. But it's like being intentional enough to be like, oh man, so what I see in Daryl is the life that I want. And so I'm trying to just get close to him.
That's amazing. Dude, I am so grateful for this time hanging out together. I could listen to you talk all day and ask you questions all night. And Jason, we've really hit some incredible topics of what it means to be generous with our time, investing in others, friendships. And I think, and I pray and I hope that this conversation will be a blessing to many people. So how can people get connected with you if there's any way that what's going on in your life right now that they can connect with?
Yeah, we got a church in Vancouver called The Way Church. Easy to find on whatever platform you're on, YouTube or Instagram, or just, I'm sure there's our website can point you to all those different places. And then I do a podcast called the Canadian Church Leaders Podcast, interview people, and really enjoy that. And if you're listening, you're not a follower of Jesus and part of a project called Alpha, and Alpha's hosted, you can find one right now online any night of the week, but thousands of churches across Canada and then tens of thousands of churches around the world host alphas, and they're actually designed for people who aren't churchgoers or Christians to just really ask questions, have a chat about these things. And I think everyone on planet Earth should at least know that they've chatted out these questions and got an honest perspective of what Christianity is about and wrestled with questions of life and faith in God. And I think Alpha is a really healthy place to do that. So yeah, I encourage you to connect with Alpha if you can.
Amazing. Thanks so much, man.
Sweet, buddy.
Have a good one.